Welcome everyone to our panel session titled Creating an Enabling Environment. My name is Habib Magrissy and I'm an MBA candidate at the University of Oxford Saïd Business School, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. This session will focus on exploring approaches to creating an enabling environment for youth, entrepreneurship, education, and employment in Sub-Saharan Africa through the lens of funding organizations. With a focus on understanding the ecosystem of available financial and non-financial support, the discussion will explore the different roles each funding organization plays, how they overlap and complement one another, and key challenges each face in achieving their strategic objectives. With me today are our panelists, Jean-Michel Severino and Nathalie Gabala. Jean-Michel is the chair of Investisseurs et Partenaires, or INP, an impact investment company dedicated to startups, small and medium enterprises, and microfinance institutions in Africa, and was previously CEO of INP for over 10 years. Prior to INP, Jean-Michel has worked at the French Ministry of Finance, the French Ministry of Development, the World Bank, and the French Development Agency. Nathalie is the Regional Director for Western, Central, and Northern Africa at the Mastercard Foundation and oversees the Foundation's global access to finance and gender strategies. She leads the delivery of the Foundation's Young Africa Works strategy in Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal, aiming to enable 30 million young Africans to access dignified and fulfilling work by 2030. Prior to joining the Mastercard Foundation, Nathalie worked for over 25 years in SME banking, microfinance, and fintech in Africa and Asia, spending time at Citibank, Standard Chartered Bank Group, as well as Ecuador Capital Partners in West and Southern Africa. Jean-Michel and Nathalie, thank you for joining us. Jean-Michel, I'd like to start with you for the view from an impact investing perspective. The question is, what is INP's theory of change in launching a new fund to deploy both private capital and grants into the education sector in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm delighted to be with you today. Well, to answering your question requires explaining very briefly what INP is and what we're doing. Actually, we have been investing for the past 20 years in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we have been dedicated at promoting African entrepreneurs, startups, SMEs, etc., especially in very poor countries. We have grown over the years. We are now managing around 400 million euros. We have invested in around 200 companies across the continent, and we have a team of about 150 people, mostly in Africa and Africans. We are a little bit less than 20 at Paris, but the rest is located in 10 African locations. And we run direct investments and also indirect investment through financial corporations that we establish. So we provide equity, quasi-equity, soft loans, and grants, thanks especially to Nathalie. I will come back to that later on. And during the course of those 20 years of very close experience and very closeness to African entrepreneurs, something has really progressively struck us more and more. And that is that there's a huge lack of capacities, of professional capacities in the business world. We have experienced that for ourselves as first a startup ourselves. We have been a startup, an African startup, and as also a team and a firm. But of course, we have experienced that through our closeness to the entrepreneurs that we support, and who are struggling every day to hire a plumber, an engineer, a physician. And we see this lack of technical capacities across the board, and this is increasing over the years. This gap in capacity is not closing. It's worse every year down the road. And there's a very simple reason to that, which is the kind of mismatch between the demographic expansion of the continent and the capacities that governments have to invest in professional education and in tertiary education. Governments have to dedicate larger and larger amounts of money to primary and secondary education, what is called in the technical world the K-12. And this is the right thing to do. But as they have limited macroeconomic capacities, there's little money left to invest in the area of professional education and tertiary education. And it boils down to incredible situations. For instance, in a country like Burkina Faso, around 80% of the people who are in the tertiary education are attending law or literature or social science. But there's virtually nobody getting into the technical education. And the reason is that the technical education is just very costly to fund. And as a consequence, you have this incredible situation that at the end of the road, you have talented young Africans that get out of higher education and cannot find any job because they're just not provided to access jobs, positions in firms, which is where the bulk of the demand is. And we have come to see that there was no possibility to bridge that gap, that over the next 20 years, there won't be enough public money to get into this higher education and this professional education fields. And it's not that there is no political will. I mean, it's just that's the macroeconomic reality. And hence, a very natural solution to that is that we get more and more private offer to train and to educate young Africans for technical education. So, and we've come to wonder whether there were people who were able and interested in doing that. And we came to observe that actually there's an incredible dynamism in and among African entrepreneurs to offer private education courses, cycles, across the board in engineering, in health, in all sorts of technical areas, in culture. But those private initiatives are at a very local scale. They struggle to grow. They have very limited access to capacity support and to funding, with the exception of the very top tier, which, I mean, the very prestigious private universities in Morocco, in Kenya, that have access to private equity funding from across the world, those who have partnerships with first-tier universities across the world, but it's a very, very, very tiny part of the higher education sector. The bulk of the education sector is elsewhere, and this part has, once more, very limited access to any type of finance. And this is how we came to think that there was room to create a specific financing tool to address this very important development challenge, because we're talking about what is probably the most important development challenge in Africa, which is creating the skills and the talents that are necessary to boost growth across the continent. And we came to think that we could do with two pillars. One is a private equity investment fund, rather classical in structure, but with a blending structure that would allow to be at the size and the profitability levels of the sector. Private education is at the same time a relatively safe sector. It's less risky than many in terms of equity investment, but its profitability is provision if you don't go only for the people who can afford to pay high tuition fees. But if you are reasonable, if you try to target middle and low classes, if you include in the structure of the deals social dimensions. You include scholarship expenses, and you don't want money to be an obstacle for accessing this type of training. Then you get to profitability profiles that are far from those that you can get in the classical, regular private equity world. In order to do that, you have to create blending structures, having traditional private investors, but also public investors, general interest investors who can be private, like foundations, for instance, or creating structures that can regroup once more private equity, traditional private equity investors, and general interest in investors. So we are working on establishing this fund, which is called IP Education to Employment. You see, education to employment. This is really the of what we want to do. Matching the gap in the market between the supply and the demand of education and work. But then we realized that there was the sector of private education was small, had also to be strengthened in its capacities in order to get more investable by traditional investment category, and we could do something to do that. And this is how we came to imagine that in this program there could be a second pillar funded by grants, and which would which would provide either very soft loans, zero interest loans, or grants to entrepreneurs that were not at a stage where they could be investable in a traditional way, but that would have to make a few additional steps to get to there, either because they would need to formalize, either they would need to strengthen the capacity of their structure, or either because they would have to reach to additional extra financial benefits in order to really be a social program. At the same time, there would be also a private financial program. So, and this is, by the way, in order to do that the Mastercard Foundation, and once more, thanks very much to Nathalie for her very instrumental role in this program, came to help and provide a significant amount of funding, of grant funding, to help establishing this pillar. So we are now at a still early stage. We are starting, for instance, implementing the program that Nathalie went through, is helping funding through Mastercard, but also with the EU, which is providing money for zero interest loans, addressing this segment. And we are still also fundraising for the program, for the equity fund. But the program is on. We have a team which is on the ground, so we see what are the results and the early results. And just to finish, I would like to illustrate what I'm saying by 3 very short examples of what we are already funding as type of businesses that we are supporting, that would give an idea of what is happening in the ground. So I thought we have now funded more than 20 businesses with this new program. So we could crowd all of them. So one I've thought at is, by the way, funded through the Mastercard program. It's a tertiary education group which is providing 3 years trainings for bachelor degrees in Senegal. This is the EASY group. And what we are helping them doing is developing a branch in Casamance, in Ziguinchor, so out of the capital city. This would be one of the 9 campuses that they are establishing throughout the country in order to reach out to the poorest regions in Senegal, not remaining in the capital, and therefore allowing students who have no means to even move to the capital to be able to study and to get engineering, networks, and information systems education where they live, and where they hopefully could find a job. So there we started with a grant of around 200,000 euros. That is going to help strengthening their CFR campus. And from them, we hope that we are going to establish a long-time relationship, which help this group develop in other provinces in Senegal and reach thousands of students. One other example I thought at is called le lycée technique moderne de Koudougou. Now, Koudougou is a small city close at 100 kilometers far from Ouagadougou, so it's in Burkina Faso, and it was created 5 years ago, and it's the goal of this technical school is to provide to the more than 200 students that they already have very solid technical engineering education, especially in the area of electricity, systems, electronics, and therefore strengthen what is really a huge gap in the skills mix in Senegal. They are providing, they are addressing the final years of the secondary education and the first years of the tertiary education spectrum. They are incredibly dynamic, and they are growing very fast, very far, but they have a very strong limitation in accessing funding in order to buy equipment, extend the classes, build additional classes, etc. So we started with a small loan from the EU IMP Style Acceleration Program dedicated to them. And once more, once we have had the first couple of years of relationship with them, we hope we can provide them with equity funding and boost their expansion. And finally, I would like to talk to you about a very different type of school. It's an institution. It's called l'Institut Académique des Bébés. It's the Babies Academic Institute. It's located in Senegal as well. It's a training institution which is dedicated to professional and technical capacity of children's professions. So they are delivering certificated degrees supported by the government to all types of facilitators, educational assistants in nurseries, maternity wards, leisure centers, etc. And you can imagine there's a huge need for this type of profession in a country and in a continent where there are so many babies who need great care and highly educated people to take care of them in the first years of their life. So IAB is at the same time a school, an institution, but it's also developing a daycare network where they can also train their own students. So the same thing, we are starting with a small zero interest loan of around 60,000 euros. This is a very recent operation for us, in order to help them increase their capacity, setup of laboratory daycare that can accommodate around 20 babies, develop an online platform to increase the accessibility of their learners to the substance and hire staff as well. And also from them, the goal is to, once we have had this a couple of years of association with them, once we have become intimate in the relationship, once we have helped them also creating an even smarter business plan for the expansion, we hope we can provide them a significant amount of equity or quasi-equity to help them, going full scale in the expansion. So you see, it's a step-by-step approach, strengthening the capacity of incredibly talented African entrepreneurs who offer a highly relevant type of education offer to the market, but need to be strengthened, have their program tightened, etc., in order to be able to go full speed. But you can imagine, and I'm going to end up with that you are not going to have BlackRock investing a few €100,000 or even if 1 or 2 million euros in a private education institution 100 kilometers far from Burkina Faso, in the middle of a military coup, in the insecurity climate of Sahel, or even going to Ziguinchor in Casamance. So in order to do that, you have to have very specialized actors who are able and willing to take the risks, backed by investors and donators, like the Mastercard Foundation, who also are willing to take the risk of getting into areas very far from the traditional marketplaces, where you do not go into fancy hotels to deal around the table of marvelous restaurants, but you with people with tech ties, even if you don't wear them more and more, even in New York. But you need to have staff, people, highly committed, willing to live in this type of countries, operate at the local level, at the local salary standards, at the local level of experience, able to understand the specificities of the sectors, the countries, the activities, and highly motivated. And this is what makes the difference of impact investment when compared to the traditional area of private equity. And I'm done. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Jean-Michel. It was really interesting hearing the different types of organizations you cited, as well as how INP is using both grants and investment capital to achieve the fund's goals. And it's actually an excellent segue for me to turn to Nathalie with a question building on the example of INP and Mastercard, the Mastercard Foundation working together. How do you see social sector funders like the Mastercard Foundation, private sector organizations like INP, as well as public sector organizations collaborating in this space?
Thank you, Habib. First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity of being here today. The foundation has been established for young people and is working for the service of the young people. So for me, any platform where we have the opportunity to exchange with the future leaders of the continent, it's an opportunity. The second reason why I'm so happy to be here today is to be on this platform with Jean-Michel. The foundation will not exist without its partners, and working with trusted partners that are aligned to our vision. It's so important, and we found that in INP. So let me tell you more about Mastercard Foundation, who we are, before I address your question. We were funded in 2006, and the way we were funded made us quite unique in the space. We were funded by the shareholders of the Mastercard Corporation when they decided to invest some of their stocks into a foundation, and gives this foundation with its own board, own CEO, so a foundation that is completely independent from the corporation. And it's important to make this distinguish, because most of the time people will believe that the Mastercard Foundation is the charitable arm of the Mastercard Corporation. We are not. And that gives us a certain level of flexibility in our approach and in the way we interact with our different partners. What makes the foundation even more unique is that in 2018, the foundation decided to devote all its resources to a singular cause. And this singular cause is the young people of the continent. more specifically youth employment. Think about it. By 2030, 375 million young people will enter the workforce every year on the continent. And by 2035, the number of young people entering the workforce will be, the greatest number of young people entering the workforce will be in Africa. So when you think about this, this is the biggest challenge that our world honestly is facing today. It's not only a problem for Africa, it's a problem it's a global problem. The foundation has identified two critical enablers for the young people, young African, to access work. The first one is access to education. The second one is access to finance, financial inclusion. And this is really the two key enablers that are driving our approach and the way we work. Young Africa Works was also established with a key and a leading KPI that is very important to us. It's that 70% of the beneficiary of our program should be young women. Why? Because intentionality matters. We were still in the week of International Women's Day, and we are still aware of the inequalities in terms of access to education and access to finance when it comes to young women, more particularly. And we have identified that only by making such bold commitment and being really intentional in reaching these targets, those beneficiaries, you are able to make a change. So those are really the three pillars of our strategy. Now, how do we do that? How do we do that differently? The first thing is one of the foundation key values, a foundation that it's values that we call co-creation. We strongly believe that the young people have the solutions. They understand their need, they understand how they can advance to either formal or informal employment or entrepreneurship, because those are really the three opportunities that our young people have. Secondly, we believe in working on both the supply and the demand side. So how do we prepare those young people to enter the workforce through different educational programs, like the program that we are working on with INP, that is a program that targets more the formal education space, but we also have a number of programs to support the young people who have decided to pursue a different path to be able to access the skills that they need to either start in the informal sector or start their enterprise on the continent. One of the aspects of co-creation has requires to move closer to the beneficiary of the program, because you want to understand what are their needs and really experience what are their needs. The foundation 2 years ago used to have only one office in Toronto. Over the last 2 years, we've opened 7 offices across the continent, and our staff component had grown from 60 to over 300 people, mainly located on the continent, just to show you the commitment and the boldness of the action. We are working with private sector because we strongly believe that the private sector are the creator of jobs, right? Really? We're working with the private sector, but we are also working with the public sector because they have the mandate to enable the creation of jobs. So we're also working in terms of policy system to support a different government across the continent to promote an enabling environment for the young people to really strive and access dignified work opportunities. Another component of Young Africa work in terms of unicity is the fact that beyond our country programs, so country programs that are mainly implemented through the 7 countries of presence that we have on the continent, we are building what we call cross-regional cross-country programs. And one of them, again, is an example of the work that we're doing in the education space with INP, but we're also early in the process of setting an impact fund, always with INP, that will focus, will be a Pan-African fund, that will be a fund of fund investing into mainly women-owned fund manager to support them to invest into women-owned businesses on the continent. What we've learned over the last 2 years working with the young people is that young entrepreneurs are more inclined to hire young people. And I'll give you an example of programs that we've launched with the Africa Leadership Academy group in South Africa, which is called the Enjaza Prize. Sorry, it's always difficult for me to pronounce this one. And it's really a challenge fund that is open to young people from the institution between the age of 15 and 20 years old. So very young people that have, smart people with very transformative ideas. Through this program, we have sponsored 140 entrepreneurs. And those 140 entrepreneurs have created 2,000 jobs through their enterprise, and mainly jobs that have been taken work opportunity for young people, other young people. So this is really the foundation as approach, and the way we believe that we'll be able to really be impactful in that space. Another example in terms of our work on the continent is the Scholar program, and this is an example more on the supply side. Mastercard Foundation has been one of the largest provider of scholarships to young Africans coming from unprivileged social backgrounds to access universities, higher education in Europe, in the US, and more recently on the continent. Through the Scholar program, we have provided close to 40,000 scholars to Africans, scholarships to Africans over the last 10 years. And what is more impressive is that 62% of the beneficiaries of those scholarships have been young women. When we know that young Africans women are usually, less likely to have access to a higher education, this is quite impactful. And when we look at how our Scholar programs has evolved since its inception, initially, most of our beneficiaries were going to attend university in Europe and in the US, and we're still continuing. Most of our partners are in that space. University partners are in that space. Now we are looking at building African institutions and working with university like the likes of Ashesi University in Ghana or the Africa Leadership Academy group that I mentioned in South Africa, to make sure that the young people can access quality education while staying on the continent. And that's a good segue in one of the last leading KPI that we have under Young Africa Works, is that we want to work primarily with African organizations. Our partners, 75% of our partners we would want that 75% of our partners to be African organizations. And the reason why we set this, once again, very bold target is that we believe that this is the only way to really implement sustainable solutions by capacitating, strengthening institutions on the continent to be able to carry out the work when we will not be there anymore. So those, in a nutshell, give you an idea of who we are as an organization and how we're trying to do the things differently in the space of youth employment.
Thank you, Nathalie. And just listening to both of your answers, a running theme seems to be that even if there is political will, there is often not enough public money available to fund solutions in this space. So my question for both of you, and we can start with Jean-Michel, is in addition to the limited amount of funding, how are governments, regulatory bodies working to facilitate the creation of an enabling environment for education, employment, and entrepreneurship in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, I think it's a very mixed situation. And of course, it depends very much on the countries, because there's a great variety. I mean, we have 54 countries in Africa, and you have 54 specific situations. So it's any type of too generalist opinion must be articulated with care and modesty. But I would say that you have a group of countries that are really going full speed for private education. They can be Anglophone and Francophone both, among the ones that have really decided to get into this direction. You have countries like Kenya, but also I think Senegal is a very open country for private education and private professional education. Others remain quite cautious and have regulations that prevent or slow the expansion. Just to name one country, we have invested in what is a very exciting tertiary education group in Cameroon called PGA. And in our experience with them, we are meeting important challenges in getting licenses, authorizations, agreements for the government to operate in X, Y, Z areas. So eventually we succeed, but it's managing the Ministry of Education requirements, regulations, etc., is really something that we have to incorporate in the investment program. This being said, and I will end with that, in no country should we operate in conflict with the local government, the national government. It's very important that even a private supplier of education is considered as part of the national education system, doing things which are coherent with the government policy. This is nations are important, countries are important, acceptability is important everywhere, and especially in the area of education. So even in a very liberal environment, having a close relationship with the Ministry of Education, with the different public authorities is important, and we should all work and fight for the same cause in a united way.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. And Nathalie?
Yeah, I was first, like Jean-Michel mentioned, we can generalize. It's the situation is very different from a country to another, and some are more advanced in terms of enabling ecosystem. And Jean-Michel has covered education. I'm going to cover entrepreneurship. What we've noticed was that we have to work with a public institution. And one of the key challenges that those public institutions face are not so much around the willingness, but it's really around the capacity that they have in terms of being able to attract the best talents from around the world to really come and design with them enabling policies, enabling an enabling environment for the MSMEs to prosper. What we've done, for example, in a country like Senegal, we've worked with the Minister of Economy and Finance at the time, and I'm not sure if it still have the same name, to establish a platform in the minister. And the platform allowed them to hire graduates from international university that had experience outside of Africa in leading institutions, And being able to come back to Senegal and support and work within the Ministry of Finance to define different policies, regulation that will allow MSMEs to prosper. One example of that is that Senegal was one of the first African countries to have a regulation around startup that they call, I think, the startup law. And that was the work of this team that had been able to do it working at the Ministry of Finance. Another example of how we're working with public institutions is in Ghana, where we are working with NBSSI, which is now called Ghana Entrepreneurship Agency. And NBSSI is the government mandate institution to support the promotion of micro and small enterprise in Ghana. What we're doing with GEA, that we call now GEA, was we've supported them in terms of capacity by partnering. They have partnered with a fund manager, local fund manager in Ghana, who had long experience in investing into MSME, to launch a program targeting MSME that had been impacted by COVID. So it was in the post-COVID environment. And so through this knowledge sharing, GEA was able to learn how to access those enterprises and being able to design a diverse program varying from soft loan to grant to even a guarantee for some of them for those MSMEs, provision also of technical assistance, but also, and this is the next level of the work that we intend to do with GEA, is to support them in establishing a platform that will be at the intersection of the different ministry working around youth entrepreneurship in Ghana, to be able to exchange learning and capture data. Something that the continent is really lacking is data, our data. And you see that across all the African countries, because you can't fix what you don't know, right? So being able to support the provision of data and measurement that will inform regulator and policy makers, it's some force also that we believe it being critical, and we're working with different governments to be able to support this work. Lastly, and this might be an example that is not directly related to entrepreneurship, but show how the power of being able to facilitate cross-learning and cross-sharing of experience across African countries, because this is something that requires intentionality. We are working when COVID happened, we launched an emergency response program that we called COVID response. And through this program, we've partnered with the Africa CDC. So the Africa CDC is one of the organizations under the African Union tasked to strengthen the continent in terms of health and provision of quality health services. And so we work with the African CDC primarily to support the provision of vaccine across the continent. But the working relationship has evolved from provision of vaccine to support in provision of skills for the young people who will want to work in the health sector. Not only formal education, partnering with different universities to provide, support in terms of education for epidemiologists, etc., but also at the level of communities. Because one of the greatest, a lot of the work around COVID was around being able to test, being able to vaccinate people. And this work was mainly undertaken by community workers, but also the big work of sensitization around COVID-19. So being able to train young people to be able to understand those those roles. And the third level of our intervention will be around manufacture. And there again, we want to support young people, enterprise in the health sector. We want to support the establishment of manufacturers on the continent, but also always having this supply and demand approach, prepare young people to take job in those sectors. So working with the Africa CDC, that is an African organization that has a platform, which is a platform that where all the countries of the African Union sit and are able to exchange knowledge and define strategy in that space together, was very powerful, because then you can leapfrog solution and really promote knowledge exchange across the different countries.
Thank you, Nathalie. And just building on your response, a follow-up question, because the Mastercard's Foundation Young Africa Work Strategy is focused on creating 30 million jobs for African youth by 2030. And a crucial part of the strategy is that the jobs should be dignified and fulfilling. For you, how do you define a dignified and fulfilling job?
This is the most difficult question that we're facing at the foundation, because there's no universal response. It's for the young people to answer that question. And it's even for individuals to answer that question. What I consider as a dignified and fulfilling work is not what you consider as a dignified and fulfilling work. So we don't have a blank answer to that question, but generic answer to that question. But what we're doing through our programs is that we always make sure that the young people are co-designer in the co-creation process. And they tell us what they consider being dignified and fulfilling for themselves, because only them know. And we are intentional in our impact framework and in the KPI that we design to reflect what we have heard for the specific group of young people. And what we've learned is that the answer to this question is different in terms of sector, in terms of country, in terms of gender, but also in terms of geography. I mean, living in the city or living in the rural area. But always being intentional in making sure that you ask the question to the beneficiary and the young people and ask them if they consider this work dignified and fulfilling.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a hard question to answer. And I'm going to turn to you, Jean-Michel, with a question from the audience, which is, what would be the most impactful way for educated technical graduates to support this work in bridging the technical capacity gap in Africa?
Well, I think there's a lot of goodwill behind this cause. And by the way, it's welcome, because if you look at the place that the education agenda has had in the past decades in the overall development agenda, it has been quite low. Everybody agrees that education is a priority for the continent and for public policies. In reality, things are quite different, and it's still a very important fight. And therefore, I will start from that point. I think that it's very important that we get all the support which is possible from highly educated people, from Africans, from etc., to make this agenda more visible and more of a real priority in the policies of the investors and the especially public or private investors. One thing that is, I won't hide the reality, we find it hard to raise the money for the private equity fund, part of IP2E, this education program I was mentioning, and much harder than it is the case for other programs that we are promoting. And the key cause we see behind this difficulty, this increased difficulty that we always have for any impact investment fundraising, is that education doesn't sound as really the key thing people want to support. And we look at social programs. The first thing that people are willing to support is, for instance, health. And other questions. So we have I think it's this ideological, political fight is absolutely critical for the entire cause. Second, I think that obviously talented people have a lot to offer. Most of the in operations, most of the or many of the entrepreneurs that we see operating in this educational area are motivated first and foremost by the academic or substantive part of what they want to do. Many of them are less interested in finance, management, and it is very frequent among entrepreneurs. People are passionate about the product that they want to operate or promote, less about how to manage and fund their corporation. Of course, there are exceptions. And it's very much the case for education. You have many former teachers, former academics, people who have an outstanding understanding of what they want to do of the product. So producing, coming and supporting to provide capacity, training, etc. for them is really quite useful. And many of those people are fast learners. Therefore, they will benefit very much from the engagement of highly educated people in this area. So I would just mention those two issues are being particularly critical for what we try to achieve.
Thank you. And another question for both of you. You've both spoken about your focus on gender in addition to education, entrepreneurship, and employment. Are you seeing opportunities in the market to deploy capital at the intersection of those two themes? Maybe we can start with Nathalie.
I think we were very careful to communicate about this initiative because it's still being designed, but there is great opportunity, especially around gender and entrepreneurship, because one of something that has been quoted again in literature is that women invest more in other women. Women tend to invest more in other women. So if we're able to facilitate the growth of a sector within finance or a finance institution where the decision of investing is taken by women and young women, then we are able to promote more women-led entrepreneurship businesses on the continent. And we are working, as I mentioned, on a fund of fund. And for us, the fund of fund is really an approach in building this ecosystem of women fund manager that will be able to identify opportunities on the continent for the young people. But then what we need to be also very mindful as we design this initiative is that we need to respond to the specific needs of a woman entrepreneurs and really address the issue holistically and looking at not only the provision of funding, but the provision of mentoring, the provision of skill, but also even thinking about issues like, children, childcare, and others that are issues that women entrepreneurs tend to face more than their male counterparts. For example.
Thank you, Nathalie. Jean-Michel?
I agree with every single word that Nathalie has said. And rather than elaborating in a conceptual way further, I would like to quote one entrepreneurial story that comes to my mind. This is the story of a lady called Fidèle Akediomonde. And this lady had been an executive in Ivory Coast in printing firms or editing, publishing firms, working for foreigners, etc. She had met she had gone through a lot of financial difficulties in the different businesses she had been part of that had taught her quite a lot. And she decided to create in 2005 a publishing firm, which is called Thales in Ivory Coast. And it's at the heart of what we want to do, I think, Nathalie, maybe as much, because Thales is first and foremost about university technical education publishing. So books for students, pupils, etc., where there's also an incredible need of local design and real actual publishing. She is also publishing general literature, novels, etc., and of course African authors, which is also quite of a big need. And she's experiencing an incredible success with her firm. So with her, we have not only gone in terms of pre-investment, but also we have come to invest in her company. Within 5 years, she grew. She hired 20 high-level staff, gone to more than 5 million euros of turnover, and she's now experiencing a 100% growth a year. 100% growth a year. She's an incredibly talented entrepreneur, and she has a deep understanding of a sector, but she's also she's among the ones who understand finance and management quite well. And you know, this is really the type of thing that you want to have by dozens and dozens and dozens happening in Africa. She's really changing the landscape. Now, honestly, you wouldn't find a single regular bank lending to Thales as a startup, and you would not also see any traditional private equity investor going and funding the expansion of Thales. Probably in 10 years' time, she will become, a darling of the financial markets. People will fight to put a dollar in her business. But for the first 10 years, she's really out of any possibility because she doesn't have the networks. And even as a woman, she has a handicap for getting access to the money in the world of males. So I think, if we can, and you have thousands and thousands of Adele in Africa. They are the ones that Nathalie wants to target. So I think we can make it. We can help those ladies, those incredible talented ladies, come to the level they will become the darlings of the markets, and they won't need us anymore. That's what we have to strive for. So to get to the stage where we are useless to them. But this is really feasible. So I personally think that we have in this incredible energy of the women entrepreneurs that exist by thousands and thousands and thousands in Africa, the power and the capacity to change the fate of the continent.
Jean-Michel and Nathalie, thank you both very much for your time. It was extremely valuable to hear your thoughts on this important and forward-looking topic. Thank you once again for joining us, and thank you to our audience as well.